Yeah. Yes. John Michael speaks.
Yeah.
This is a morning session where we should change the bumper stickers to trust the students. Among the distinguished people we've had at this conference, amazing conference, frankly. I've been emailing with people, friends, colleagues, trying to describe this session, that session. I couldn't even read them all there last night. That was because of your dinner reception, actually. It's been extraordinary, and we've had a remarkable audience. I was doing this before church this morning around the country, but remarkable guests and speakers, possibly the person who has, certainly from the leadership position, has direct experience of what you all are doing in Florida is PATRICIA Okkkers, because of what's happened at New College. PATRICIA has had a very distinguished career as an educational leader, but also as a scholar. She is a scholar of 19th century American literature, particularly women's literature. She's the author of Social Stories, the magazine in 19th century America. Also the book Our Sisters Editors, Sarah J. Haley, and the Tradition of 19th century American Women Editors. Also edited a book called Transnationalism and the American Serial Fiction. She taught for years, I think since 1990 at the University of Missouri, where she also rose to at least 2 different kinds of provost, which is where her university leadership. She was president of the college in Florida in 2020. She served as president from July 20 to last January 2023, when she was fired by this structure, system, movement that we've been examining, which is a nice way of putting it, I think. I would send you to a couple of her Chronicle highlight essays if you haven't read them. One with the title, which you should read. I was president of Florida's New College. Then I was fired. Here's how to fight for academic freedom. That's a good title. It tells you very directly what that's about. And I haven't read this one yet, PATRICIA, but I'm eager to, as a product of Big Ten universities and a former athlete at Michigan State, an essay called The Madness of College Sports. And it's extraordinarily corrupt now. Sorry. Even though I check ESPN scores, I follow Michigan State every day. It's crazy, but it's part of our, I don't know, it's part of the, in some ways, horrible compromises we've made in higher education when sports got planted in our universities, unlike abroad in many other countries. I do want to do a quick shout out to the students who are here from Würzburg in Germany, 5 or 6 of you. I'm going to meet you all a little bit later. I can't wait. They are here because they are studying these issues: race, American education, the crisis of polarization in America. I spent a year in Germany teaching 30 years ago, but I learned something about the fascination and the interest among Germans and other Europeans with America's problems. And right now,
as I was just learning. We're not doing so well in the world's estimations, in case you hadn't imagined that. But I am delighted to turn this over to the distinguished Patricia Okkerer, and she will be moderating and introducing our panel of students. Patricia.
Thank you. Thank you for that warm introduction. It really is a pleasure to be here, and I am extraordinarily excited about this particular panel. I do want to thank all the organizers for this conference. It's been a wonderful experience to be here and to learn with and among you. So I want to say just a very brief thing, some brief comments about the session, and I'm going to introduce our speakers. So I'm excited about this session in particular for two reasons. First of all, we have asked really existential questions about the future of education, higher education, K through 12. And we cannot, as leaders in higher ed, we cannot begin to think about what action we're going to take until we ground ourselves in this student experience. And so it is so important for us to find out from the students what their experience have been and what they think they need for this particular time. So I am delighted to hear from these, and I will tell you, future leaders of many different things, but we got an amazing panel. Secondly, I'm excited about this panel because it does it's a little bit different from the rest of the sessions, I think, of this conference, because we're taking a little bit step back. I love history. I'm a literature professor by trade, but I do love history, and I love U.S. history. But the focus has been mostly on history, and there's no question about the importance of that topic. But reading itself is under attack. And so this is a panel that takes a step back and says, well, we're not talking just about a particular kind of reading, but reading itself as a practice. What is the state of reading in America today? And it is without question, in my mind, under attack. And I want to be clear, this may be an unpopular view, but my own view is that attacks on reading can come from the left and the right. So when people say this is offensive, we should not read it anymore, as someone who studies, I teach the 1850s, what do I assign that is not in some ways offensive? Much of what I assign students is offensive in some ways, right? And so this notion about being offended by texts is not actually a partisan issue. And so I think people from all corners of higher ed need to think about how we think about reading. The interesting thing to me as we think about reading is that precisely at the moment when people are talking about banning books and actually banning books and restricting and talking about we should not be talking about divisive topics in the classroom, reading is the central thing that is the essential practice of an education. It doesn't matter whether you're a chemist or an economist or a literature student like I was. Reading is central. We study scientific papers. We learn how to read in our disciplines. And so the irony is the thing that is most fundamental to becoming educated is the thing that is being attacked right now. So this is a panel that's going to take a step back, and I've asked our panelists, our experts today, to think about reading in whatever way they want. Maybe it's history, maybe it's something else. So let me introduce, I'm going to start at this end here. I'm going to work. Bianca HÜLS, I hope I got the last name, is a German Fulbright teaching assistant here at Flagler College. She is a graduate of the University of Leipzig in Germany, studying communication and media science, and also has a certificate or qualifications in secondary education and teaching of English and Spanish. So if she switches to another language, we told her we'll nudge her and get her back to English for our benefit. Adrienne Martinez is pursuing a law degree at the University of Florida. She is a graduate of University of Florida in political science and history, president of the Florida trial team, currently the legal intern with public defender of the 8th Judicial Circuit. Grace CASTELIN is a student at University of Central Florida studying political science and sociology with a wide range of leadership experience, president of UCF's NAACP, and the social justice chair of UCF's National Council of Negro Women. Joshua Mast, recent graduate of Flagler College, studied international studies and political science, vice chair of the Putnam County Democratic Party, wide range of political experience, including being a candidate for county commissioner. And Courtney Williams at the far end is a senior criminal justice major at Bethune-Cookman University. She is the chaplain and membership chair for the BCU chapter of the National Associations of Blacks in Criminal Justice and a Campus Vote Project Democracy Fellow. She also serves as a student intern for her university Center for Law and Social Justice. And please know that I had to seriously abbreviate the accomplishments of these panelists. What I'm going to do, really extraordinary. What I'm going to do is I've asked each of them to begin with a story or a point that they want to, totally unscripted on our part. I have no idea what they're going to talk about one thing that they want to share with us that informs the question of this panel about what they need, why they read, and what they need. Then I have one question, and then I'm going to turn it over to the audience. So I really do hope we'll have a conversation. So with that, I'm going to actually start. We're going to go down the row. So if we can start, Bianca, if you would share your story or point that whatever it is that you want to share with us. So welcome to our panelists.
So thank you for introducing us. I think it's going to be a fantastic opportunity to speak about the differences, especially from a cultural perspective from Germany. So I arrived at Flagler about 6 weeks ago, and I'm teaching one of the core classes as well as a German class. And what I was totally amazed with was the knowledge of students about their own country. Their own history of their country. So we talked about terms that I learned during my studies at the University of Leipzig they had never heard about. So this is their own country's history, but there are aspects they don't know anything about. And I was very shocked with that. So this was something I didn't expect. Because as I said to Dr. Butler last week, we had only 2 modules of American studies at my university to become an English teacher for our secondary education. I was like, that's only 2 modules. Like, this is not enough knowledge to have to teach English as a foreign language at school. And as I realized, we learned more in those 2 modules, those 2 semesters, that some of the students learned in high school about their own country. And I was like, that is terrifying to me. And I also talked about my high school students in Germany. They were grade 8. And last year we did a fantastic project on The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. So we worked with the book as well as the film, and these students were awesome. They learned a lot of things. We did a great project, and for me, it was very, very different to come here and learn about college students not knowing a lot of aspects of American history. And that's something that reading can really, really help with, in my opinion.
Hi, everyone. My name is Adrienne Martinez. I'm a student, law student at the University of Florida, double Gator, go Gators. So one of my favorite quotes that stuck with me since undergrad, it's from former Florida Governor Ruben Askew. And he said, a leader is someone who cares enough to tell the people not merely what they want to hear, but what they need to know. And I think that quote has gained so much strength over the years. And, if Florida wants to be a leader, we need to be able to have these uncomfortable conversations. Like, the history of race and the history of slavery isn't necessarily something we want to hear in the 21st century, but it's something that we need to know. And that quote has guided my scholarship. It's guided my student activism. And with that quote in mind, I was part of the student activists that got UF administrators to confront their ties of slavery and its legacies at UF. Through that student activism, I was appointed to a presidential task force on UF racial history. I was on that task force with Professor Paul Ortiz, who spoke at the conference yesterday. So being able to tell the full story of history has become so important to me and my work. And this past summer, I had the honor of interning with the ACLU's racial justice program. And I was actually part of the education equity team that is litigating the Stop Woke Act. So the whole idea of banning books and limiting the resources that students have to different viewpoints has become very close to home for me. And, you know, I just like to bring it back to that quote: a leader is someone who cares enough to tell the people not merely what they want to hear, but what they need to know. And I think that's why we're all here at this conference, because we want these resources. We need these resources. But yeah, that's my experience there.
So what we read and why we need it, I'll say for me, a personal anecdote is ever since I did go to University of Central Florida, my very first class, my freshman year, was a class called Social Problems, where I was able to learn about these important topics that, you know, create systematic injustices in our society, and like talked about those different topics, whether that be critical race theory or other, you know, discriminatory practices against marginalized communities in our country. So this class really did like spark the fire I had within myself to do all the advocacy that I do now, and the career of social justice, and, you know, trying to work to dismantle these systems of oppression in my life now. And yeah, it really did spark that flame. So just knowing that classes like that in literature, because we did read a lot of books regarding that literature, is not going to be accessible to students that are coming into University of Central Florida, or students that are currently in high school. As we all know, like the AP African American History course got canceled. Like all of these resources are just not going to be at accessibility anymore, which is really disheartening, because it kind of is removing that fire from that generation that is coming up, and that's exactly what they want, which is very unfortunate. But it's just I just know, like in my summer program that I had over the summer as well, we had a public policy and international affairs program where we were also allowed to learn about social poverty and inequality, as well as classes about systems of oppression. And like I was always the running joke in the class, because they're like, "Oh, you're from Florida, like you're not allowed to learn about these things." But it's just really sad, because we do have this reputation for our state at this point. And just even organizing at my school, as I don't know if some of you guys were in a conference earlier on Friday, Professor Castanello mentioned me, as I was a student at UCF Students Government who wrote a resolution to oppose HB 99, but not that one, but the Stop Woke Act at the school, to hope that, you know, the school doesn't implement those measures and gives teachers a better outline and understanding of how teachers can approach that bill. And just with that resistance and just talking to students, not even in student government, but just my peers and colleagues, like a lot of people that I even expect to be impacted by the Stop Woke Act, like it really does cause a hindrance on our generation. As I knew, like theater majors, sociology majors, even some math majors were being affected by this bill. So it's just really sad that this is something that we have to go through. And it's just the dismantling and the hindrance that it's going to have on our education now, and prohibiting not even me, because I'm seeking education outside of Florida, going forward from this. And just everyone else I know is saying like, yeah, like I'm not staying here because of these bills that are happening. So it's really dwindling down education, innovation. Our teachers are leaving the state, our students are leaving. So even though our state might be underwhelming soon, it's just really sad that it's just on a downhill battle from here.
Well, good morning, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Butler, Dr. Okkerer, and Yale for inviting me here and for hosting this conference. I'm probably more of your atypical panelist and former student of Flagler. I was 32 when I decided to go back to college to finish my education. And at that time, I was fresh off the heels of a political campaign in the 2020 election cycle, which was an eye-opening experience, to say the least. I was the first openly gay person to run for office in Putnam County, also the youngest at the time. And what I found interesting was that I wasn't necessarily running for the office that I was seeking. I was actually running against Donald Trump, which all the way down a little bitty Putnam County I thought was interesting. But after that, coming into college and combining the Stop Woke Act at the same time, many things came into focus. I think probably in a different perspective for me. Because I was an adult and I had a different perspective. One of the things that I don't think people realize is even at a place like Flagler or a private institution in the state of Florida, is while we might not be affected by these state laws directly, they do have an impact and they're designed to. Take this conference, for example. It was not given the due marketing that I think it should have been in comparison to other conferences due to fear from state government and retribution, which I think is so unfortunate. You know, as a student and a very strong-willed student, outspoken student, I wasn't necessarily afraid to speak my mind in the classroom. But I did see instances where there is always one or two students that probably don't have the same viewpoint and are uncomfortable. But in my point of view, being uncomfortable is the point of getting educated. Personally, I want to know all sides of an issue so that I can form my own opinion. I feel like everybody else should want the same thing. I mean, Ron DeSantis, for example, rails against the elites and, you know, what the Ivy League schools are doing, but he fails to mention he's Ivy League educated. He went to Harvard University. So by his own logic, he should be a communist. So where is the levelness? I mean, it's just ridiculous. And, you know, who's to determine what is offensive? You know, the language in these bills is so vague. And again, I think it's by design to get immediate, cheap political points without taking into account the ramifications of long-term damage that you do, not only just locally and at the local level in our schools or the state, but internationally. How are we going to compete on an international stage with other countries academically when we are afraid to even teach our own history or even in our own backyard? So, you know, as a member of the LGBTQ community, you know, it's beyond offensive, but I'm born and raised here. And in the 90s, when I was in grade school, it was something that was not talked about ever. And I still turned out to be me. So I exist. So this idea that if we don't talk about it, that we're just going to go away silently into the night is just pure fantasy. And, you know, I think one thing that the left probably gets wrong on this issue is a messaging point of view. And, you know, I'm a realist. And I think that we need to come to terms with, you know, acceptance does not equal agreement. And while I don't really agree with the term agreement, because to me, you know, nobody chooses to be a certain way, you know, I think that if we can all just come to a place of accepting other people that are different than us, we could go a lot further in our society, instead of maybe trying to force people to agree with us. Just embrace the fact that we don't agree, but we still exist and we're here. So thank you again.
Good morning, everyone. I am Courtney Williams, a senior criminal justice major at Bethune-Cookman University. And I have, when I read the question, why we read what we need, a thought of my first English class at Bethune-Cookman University popped up in my head. And we read, one of the stories we read was The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. And the story was so beautiful, yet gut-wrenching for somebody who especially is a darker person, a darker woman. read things that made me very uncomfortable, offended in some way, not because of what she wrote, but because of the realities of the story. And the story is about these young girls who are trying to figure out if they're beautiful, what makes them beautiful, and things like that. I just it was really hard to read some of the themes in the story. But then I thought, although I was uncomfortable, I thank God, because I was able to be in a space where we were encouraged to read stories about colorism and stories about sexual assault and abuse. And we were not told to shy away from the uncomfortable conversations and discussions or the topics, but instead think critically about those topics and what they mean for us as students, as future leaders, but also what it means for us as individual people. Bethune-Cookman University is an HBCU, a private HBCU founded by Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune. And it actually started as a school for young women. So being able to read stories about being a Black woman, or being a person who just tries to live every day, those stories should not be banned. They should not be seen as divisive or offensive, yet as an opportunity for us to grow our mindset and our perspective on the world, on each other, because every day, and why this is why I choose higher education, is just because without ourselves, without people, why are we here? What are we doing? So the stories that we read, where it targets different people, different cultures, different backgrounds, not the typical, and I'm sorry to the white men out there, but not the typical stories of just white cis het men. No, there are more people out there, and figuring out what those stories are, what those perspectives are, the history, the culture, the beauty, the joy, the sadness, all of those things that are in these stories that we read, they give us a better understanding of the other people out there, the Black people, the Hispanic people, the Middle Eastern people, the LGBTQ people, the women, the people who don't identify as either women or men, the everybody in us. And as I see the people out here, I can tell that we all have a unique story. So why shy away from that story, and why ban those stories? There's no room for us to improve if we ignore everybody else. So I believe those stories, like The Bluest Eye, I also had to read the Beloved, which is also a crazy story. All of those stories, yeah, they're uncomfortable, but they're good, they're important, and they take us farther than where we are today. And if I can learn something like that from a month of reading The Bluest Eye, imagine what we can learn and grow when we do a whole semester, a whole year, a whole matriculation of undergrad and graduate school, and further and further and further and further as we go. Oh, we'll get to know everybody. We'll get to understand all cultures, and I feel like that's why we read and what we need, truly. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the panelists for sharing their stories. So I'm going to ask my first question, my one question, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience. Let me frame it a little bit. So the issue that comes up, the language that we're hearing about concerns about reading, is that reading is indoctrination. There's a fear, and we've talked about this during the conference, but there's a fear of the power that authors and teachers have over us, and that you read something and somehow it magically turns you into something else. I do love I forget who mentioned this, that if that were so, then we would indoctrinate students to make sure they all turn their work in on time. Apologies to whoever raised that point yesterday, but I thought it was so helpful. But so as much as I would want to argue that position, I do think that the critics of reading in that regard are right about one thing, that reading does have power, right? Authors have tremendous, some of you have already shared about things that you changed your mind about things, as if that's a bad thing. You didn't suggest that, but right, the idea, but that authors have extraordinary power over us. They can create empathy with people that maybe we didn't have empathy for before. They can make us change our minds about certain things. They can open up new worlds, right? You think about, so the critics about reading these days are not wrong about the power that authors have. There's extraordinary power. Some of their power, of course, is just to seduce us into keep reading, to stay up too late and keep turning the page, right? So authors do have power. But I want to turn our attention to the power that readers have, right? So readers, we can share books with other people. We can do what I do often if I own the book, or sometimes I can't help myself, and I even put a sticky note into a library book of when something is so offensive and so wrong, you write a nasty comment in the book and make sure that somebody else reads it. Like, this is, we highlight things, we comment on books. Like, there's all sorts of ways in which readers get to talk back. And what I love is we always have the last word. The author doesn't get to say, yeah, but right, if I make a comment, that stays there. And of course, we also have the power of, we can always slam that book shut and never open it again. Right. So as an educator, I am interested in, are we creating a generation of empowered readers? Do our readers today recognize the power that authors have, and also teachers, right? You assign text, you're told, but are we creating empowered readers where they feel comfortable arguing with something that they've read, kind of weighing it, going back and forth? So my question to the panelists is, and I'm going to start actually with Courtney, just so you have a second, I'm going to go the other way for now, is to ask whether you've been given or the opportunity to develop skills to have that power as a reader, to read something and say, this is total nonsense. I don't care what you say. I disagree with this. Or do you feel like you've been encouraged to just accept the things that you are assigned to read? So any insights that you have about recognizing that authors have power, but so do readers? So Courtney, can I ask you to start? You talked a little bit about that in your story, but so any insight on, has your education helped you become an empowered reader? That's the question.
Of course. So I'm actually going to start with my high school education, which really began my interest in becoming a critical reader. And that's what I think this is really about: critical reading, critical thinking, be able to take ideas, leave ideas, agree with ideas, disagree, and be okay with that. We don't always have to agree with everything that we read, in my opinion. But I was lucky enough to be a diploma candidate in the International Baccalaureate program. And that program really fosters the idea of having a well-rounded education and a critically thinking education with all subjects. With math, I was even critically thinking about what formula I would use here and how I would plug the numbers in and things of that nature. So we read a wide variety of stories from different people, from different backgrounds, different cultures, all of those things. The Kite Runner is one book that's coming to the top of my head. And with those stories, we were made to write essays about how the author used, themes and rhetorical devices and things like that. How did the author use that to convey this message? And as a reader, what message do you what are you taking from the story and things of like that. And of course, there were no wrong or right answers. It was just being able to read and critically think about the devices that the author was using, and how that on a greater scale can be applied to the world, and universal ideas and things like that. So I believe that education for me allowed me to go into college and automatically kind of have that critical thinking and critical reading skills, which is why as I continue, I try to find, different stories and things like that. But it was the IB program also allowed us to, because it's international, we read stories from all over the world, authors from all over the world. It was not just American stories. So obviously that brings in cultures that we don't even, that is not here. You know what I mean? So like I believe I read the Wind Up Bird Chronicles, which is story based in Japan. And so cultures that are coming in from there. So I believe that my main takeaway was definitely reading stories from authors and people who do not come from here, who do not automatically reflect us, because those perspectives were very interesting in being able to understand how stories can be conveyed and messages can be conveyed, and the differences and how we communicate with each other, the language and the different symbols that we see versus what other people see, and just that variety of a way you can examine a story, and being told and taught how to do that was really important for me and how I became a critical thinker and reader.
Thank you. Joshua?
Well, I actually, again, as an adult student coming back into college, I, again, was already of the mindset, especially since it was also in, the same time as the Stop Woke Act was coming through. So I came into school with a certain tenacity, to say the least, of, wanting to get as much information as I could. I was also fortunate enough to take a class with Dr. Butler over the summer, which we studied the Vietnam War, but we actually were studying it from the Vietnam perspective. And then we did a study abroad in June, which we traveled all over Vietnam, again, studying it from their perspective. So if you want to talk about indoctrination, we can talk about indoctrination. This is not indoctrination that we're talking about in the United States. And I'm angry, and other people, everyone should be angry. It is ridiculous that we keep perpetuating these lies and falsehoods, whatever you want to call them, total BS, that we're indoctrinating kids, when every student that is in a public school, if they're going to be given a reading assignment, 9 times out of 10, they're given a slip to take home to their parents to sign, saying it's okay for them to read it. No student is objecting to these texts. It's their parents that are objecting to these texts. So if anyone's indoctrinating anyone, it's parents indoctrinating their own children and forcing their own views onto kids. If you really were a critical thinker and cared about higher education and being an educated person, I actually had a professor that I did not agree with. And it was a federal government class. And we got into actually a back and forth in the middle of class, over a assignment that he had given to the class, trying to help students figure out where their ideology fell. And the questions were, should Hillary be indicted for her emails? Do you agree with post-birth abortion? I mean, just the most outrageous things that are not even policies, and to treat politics as if it's a monolith, or even society as a monolith. Many Democrats did not agree with what happened with Hillary's emails. Many Democrats are against abortion. And I think we need to look at people on the right and start asking them and talking to them and asking them to speak up, because this is an issue that's really happening from the far right, particularly in Florida. But this professor said, you know, you are more than welcome to do a total mind flush when you leave this classroom. If you don't agree with everything that's being taught in here, that is totally your prerogative. And it was. And so I walked right out of that class and thought, you know, I can take from this what I need to and what is relevant, but, you know, talking about Hillary's emails and abortion, you know, is not going to influence my higher education. So, you know, I think for younger students and the traditional college student, and even K through 12, you know, don't be afraid to speak up, and even against your own family members. You have to protect your own education and your own sense of self, and stop allowing other people to force you. But I also think it's really, really important that we stop, I guess, embracing this notion of, you know, we don't have to agree. We don't have to agree. Everybody has their own opinion. You're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. And facts are facts. So if you don't agree with a fact, then there's another name for that. So we really, 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 and it's really up to educators, I think, to, you know, nail this point home, is that you can form a different opinion, but that opinion is going to be based off of the same facts. So, you know, take from this what you will, but I really think people need to wake up and realize, I mean, I know it's not a popular messaging point, but the first library that was burned down during Hitler's reign was a library that contained texts on transgender people, LGBTQ people, and it was targeted because of that. So these conversations are uncomfortable, but it doesn't make it any less true, or that it never happened because we don't talk about it. So, you know, life is uncomfortable, so get used to it.
Grace.
So I think when looking at this question, it's important we look at what reading is essentially, and inherently it's literally written prose of an individual or any human being's ideas that they decide to write down, or synthesis of ideas that they got from their past. So it's just a question of, why are we allowing the expression of these ideas to be prohibited and refrained from people's you know, experiences, as, again, it's very much a misdeed and a disgrace to the academic community to refrain these ideas to be expressed, because I do believe that's the beauty of having that open space in academic community, as we're able to build on each other's ideas, and that just leads to much more progress and development and innovation for ideas and resolutions to be made for our future. So just the fact that this alone is happening is, again, just sets our society 10 years back and is going to continue revolving us back in time. But also kind of relating to Courtney, I also did the IB program, and I do like that program specifically, like that really opened my eyes to so many perspectives, not just of different cultures, different races, but different international perspectives. And I know, like, a lot of people I know that they did IB, like, you can kind of tell, because you really do get that greater understanding and perspective of the world. And even other things like in high school, like in debate, like we also studied a lot of different literatures that we were able to talk about and have that civil discourse and engagement. And yes, while it's important to set those rules and standards so that no one has like hostile verbiage towards each other or feels attacked, I feel like once those standards are set down and everyone is respectable to each other, it's really important for us to have those conversations, because that's the only way we'll really be able to understand each other as human beings. And is reading indoctrination? No, like, at the end of the day, we all are our own selves, and we all have our own brains, our own psyches, our own cognitions to be able to look at a subject and interpret it for what we want to interpret as. Whether you agree with it or you disagree with it, that is your responsibility to do, but to literally prohibit another individual and taking away their freedom as a human being to have the ability to decipher what they believe in and don't believe in is like that is a God-given right every person is subject to. So just the fact that our government is trying to instill these laws and practices that would be instilled in, again, other societies I'm not going to talk about is just really much a disgrace. And indoctrination, I personally don't know anyone who has claimed to be indoctrinated. In our generation, we're very quick to call out a teacher or say something when we see something controversial, we feel we're being treated. Exactly. See something, say something. So if we feel any type of mistreatment, injustice happening, like especially we have social media at our hands, we are very quick to cancel a teacher out or call them out and get our school administration to get on that and stop it from happening for us and other students. So the fact that this has never happened at all, like that just shows like why is the governor and government legislator passing out these policies that literally no one has complained about? Like why are you trying to fix a problem that is not broken? Something about that. But yeah, so again, reading is simply just a space of ideas. The same way we're allowing ourselves to watch TV, we're allowing ourselves to have face-to-face interactions. At the end of the day, all of it is just engagement and expression of ideas that are being exchanged between different people. So at that point, just ban TV or face-to-face. Yeah, but that's all I have to say.
So I'm going to tackle this question from a historian perspective because I'm a huge history buff. But going off of the earlier points, indoctrination, it's defined as, forcing someone to accept a particular set of beliefs without consideration of whether those set of beliefs are right or wrong, or without consideration of other ideas. And the people who are supporting the Stop Woke Act, they say like this act needs to be passed because, if our students are learning other perspectives, that's indoctrinating them. But I feel like when you limit resources, that's when indoctrination happens, because you're not showing all sides of history. And I was telling one of my mentors, who is a historian, like I was venting to her about all of this. And she goes, Adrienne, Nazi Germany, like they didn't start with the concentration camps. They started with burning books and banning books. And it really goes to show that the more things change, the more they stay the same. And one of my mentors from UF, who sadly passed away, her name is Dr. Patricia Hilliard-Nunn. She taught the concept of Sankofa, and it means go back and get it. And Sankofa is so vital to racial justice today, because if we don't know what happened in the past, then we don't know if we're getting better or we're getting worse. We don't know how to gauge the current political climate. So for having legislation like the Stop Woke Act, like limit instruction on the types of history that can be taught and like the types of information that students receive, I feel like that's more of indoctrination, if anything else. And as a law student, especially, we're posed with a bunch of different arguments, all sides. And that has definitely helped me think more critically about how we see issues. Like we're trained to do legal research and write objective memos on whether we think a court will rule a certain way based on the text of a statute, history, tradition, precedent, and social cues and things like that. And I'm happy to say that in my classes, sometimes I'll be the lone dissenter. And, the Supreme Court, they can't really agree on a lot of issues either. So I'm not afraid to say Martinez dissenting and then make my argument, putting in all the facts and the figures. But yeah, I believe that having access to a diverse set of resources, a diverse set of reading, like that's how we achieve education equity. And that's how we achieve equity in general, because education is the most efficient vehicle for us as a generation to pass on our values to future generations. And that's why this fight on the education grounds is so important. Like, it's so important for us to speak out about, because education is powerful. Knowledge is power, and people know this. And that is exactly why they are trying to limit our resources. But yeah, law school has definitely made me more of a critical thinker in that sense. I've always felt very free to express my opinions. And, you know, I have friends and colleagues that disagree, and that's okay. And we can have a conversation. We can look at all the facts and figures and talk it out. But like I mentioned before, like in limiting resources, you're limiting a student's right to receive information. And at that point, it's viewpoint discrimination. And it comes at the cost of, you know, the oral histories and the stories of people of color and marginalized groups. And that's why it's so important for us to continue to illuminate those stories, so they're not just faded out into the mainstream narrative of history.
Okay. I was just thinking about a story from elementary school when I was in 3rd grade and we had a state test coming up. And the first question you didn't get points for was, how many books do you have at home? So there were 4 pictures to choose from. It was 1 shelf, 2 shelves, 3 or 4. And I was like, how am I supposed to answer this question? We have like 10 shelves at home. There's no option for that kind of amount of books. So I sat there like 8-year-old Bianca in front of this test thing. I didn't even start the test questions. So I was sitting in like 30 minutes trying to get across this thing. Like, where's the other option? How do you leave space for other realities? Like, how do you leave space for that kind of options? So reading really was something that I was like given by my parents. We had a very educated background at home. We were always encouraged to read. During kindergarten, my parents always read stories to me. So I was like, I want to do this on my own. I want to get there and get into all those different facets of the world. So that was always a door for me to access knowledge, and then on my own becoming more independent and access knowledge in all of its variations and topics and authors and backgrounds and diversity. So I was just thinking about the same thing. What is indoctrination? So I used this resource. So I looked up books. I used the internet. I did use my competence of reading. I came across the same definition as ADREANNE. So it's teaching something uncritically, not considering other perspectives, other sets of beliefs. And I also thought about the same perspective. Let's play the reverse card. Isn't that happening right now with cutting off those different possibilities to get access to knowledge, to limiting those things? Isn't that indoctrination? And I would say the very essence of democracy is having the possibility to express your opinion, the freedom of speech. Is it really freedom of speech if you're only allowed to have one perspective to be talked about?
Thank you so much. At this point, I'm happy to, we have time for a little bit of time for questions. I think we're good on there. So any questions from the audience? Thank you so much for helping with the mics.
Okay, sorry. For sure that, but then also we do have some time. We really want to engage in this dialogue and thank all of you for your time and your brilliant thoughts. So don't feel rushed, and we can kind of hopefully keep a good dialogue going. I'm going to go to some people I have not heard from yet though, but I promise everyone will be able to go.
Hello, my name is Casey. I'm a bartender and I'm a former student of Dr. Butler. I'm in mental health recovery because of that. So one of the question that I really have, since you are students and educators, what bargaining power do you have when you're, going up against like the Board of Education, the school board? Like, what can you guys do, especially like in your positions? Simple as that.
I'll take that because I already do a lot. I think Dr. Butler can attest to this. I am not afraid to take on the status quo. I guess probably being from this area, growing up as a gay kid, was not easy. So it really, you earn your stripes, I guess, so to speak. But I said earlier, don't be afraid to speak out because everybody has their own sense of marketing power, particularly in the age of social media. But I think that the younger generation probably needs to maybe think outside the box a little bit when it comes to social media and really take that same thought process and take it to, their school boards or their county commissioners or their state reps, state senators, and get involved, in face-to-face debate, conversation, because that's where the power lies. There's so many voices on the internet that it can get drowned out. But I think on a more macro scale, we need to stop defending and start, being more on the offense on these issues, because I don't need to defend being able to read a book. If you think that people shouldn't read, I'm not going to defend that because it's just indefensible. I'm not going to lower myself to that argument. There is a very calculated political movement and goal that is happening with these things that people need to understand. And it is not just about making conservative kids not feel offended. It is about keeping people ignorant so that certain individuals can stay in power. And, if you sit down and really, take a beat and think about it, that's what's happening. If you keep people dumb, certain people get to stay in power. So I'm not going to defend being able to form a complete sentence because, I was given access to, books. So we need to start asking different questions and stop defending. I think that's the biggest marketing thing that we could do.
And I want to add on to Joshua's point. I don't think students realize how much power they have. Like, student activism is real, y'all. That's real. Yes. So when I was an undergrad, I wrote my senior history thesis on universities and their ties to slavery, convict leasing, and prison labor. And my argument was that students are the driving force behind these institutions of higher education confronting their ties of slavery. And if you look at US history, it's because of student activism that we have the Institute of Black Culture. It's because of student activism we have La Casita, and because of student activism we have all these task forces for, studying US ties to history. So one reason why students have so much power, and I've been in contact with our old our old chief diversity officer at UF. And when I was telling him all of, the different task forces that are happening and my different activism, he said, Adrienne, you have successfully navigated the three-headed dragon of fear, greed, and hunger for power that swallows coalitions of justice far too often. And I really just sat there and thought, like, that is the reason why student activism is so powerful, because we are insulated from that three-headed dragon. We're not worried about being tenured. We're not worried about, families. We're not worried about our jobs. We are here as students. We are here to learn, and we are here to speak out to better society in the future. And, you know, we do have a lot of support that comes from professors. And if it wasn't for, you know, my professors and my mentors, my student activism wouldn't be as passionate or as strong as it is right now. But students are that driving force. And I hope that, you know, all the younger, you know, undergrads out here realize that you wield a tremendous amount of power. And, you know, if you see something wrong, write a student government resolution, talk to administrators, like, don't be afraid to shake things up, because that's how things are going to get better, when we finally speak out and tell the higher ups exactly what we need to grow.
And I just want to quickly add on to that, voting. Like, we need to vote. I feel like that's a obvious like thing to say, but especially on my campus, doing my work as a democracy fellow, which that is to, you know, foster an environment where our campus can learn about voter education, voter registration, voting in general, voting rights, all of those things. Our work currently is getting our students on campus to go out and vote, because over in Volusia County, we have a polling location on campus. And when I went, I maybe saw like 5 students out of the hundreds of community members. That's ridiculous. Students need to vote, and that's why they're targeting us, because they know once we go out and vote for these types of specific things, and the candidates that, you know, DeSantis going on and applying these things into our state, if we were to go out and vote, and if we would have voted the way that we should have voted when DeSantis was reelected, then, you know, some things might have not have happened the way that they have happened. So I just feel like voting is like a big way that we can, you know, get our voice definitely out there.
And I just want to briefly, while yes, I echo the sentiments of what everyone said already, like, yes, using social media, voting for sure, and using all the platforms, whether that's like your student government, using any resources that are going on in your university. Like for us, we went to our board of trustees meeting where they literally have open forums where students can literally go in and speak. And there's so many other departments and agencies on university campuses that students really just don't know about, but we really need to, as students, take the reins and go and do deep investigations and enter these spaces, because at the end of the day, history is literally watching us. Like, we have people studying here from Germany. We had people from Switzerland come to UCF because the world is fascinated on the modern day, basically, indoctrination and almost a Hitler age that is happening in Florida today. So it's really important that we are at the front lines and speaking for ourselves, because everyone else seems to be speaking for us and saying that we're being indoctrinated, or all of these things are happening to us. But at the end of the day, if we don't speak up for ourselves and speak the truth and show what we really stand for, things are just going to keep reversing. So,
Well said.
Thank you so much. I think the way that I want to introduce myself, since we're supposed to do that, is that in this moment, I'm your student, and that what I learn is always, what I'm going to be able to learn is always more important than what I have already learned. And I have, I think, 2 questions for Bianca. One is short and one might be a little bit longer. So the first one is, what were some of those concepts or considerations that you were familiar with that the students here were not? And then the other is related to your experience in Germany of how your schooling or other experiences have given you skills related to absorbing and thinking about the very complex history in Germany related to World War II.
Thank you for those questions. I think the first one for the college students here, in one of my classes, they didn't know about the term frontier in terms of the westward expansion. And that's something I came across in American Studies 101, basically in Germany. So this was like the first term they didn't know. As well as the concept of, we talked about Holocaust and World War II and the rise of fascism in Germany last week. So they were very terrified with the idea that Germans did exhibit people of color, like people of color, basically, in human zoos. But they didn't know that kind of similar things happened in the US as well. And I had some students picking up, like 3-4 students, American ones, who knew about those things, and also wrote in their self-reflection paper after class that they were very much shocked and confused that their fellow students didn't know about these things as well. So still, there are a lot of things that are not talked about for example, mistreatment of people of color in this country. So these are a lot of concepts connected to these topics that are still not talked about, as well as the whole forming of the nation, the expansion, everything that happened to Native Americans. So those were things I was really shaken up with. And in terms of my education in Germany, we have a very broad education. Still, the education system needs a lot of new innovations, a lot of things that the younger generation of teachers are now trying to develop. So something I do in my classroom is I want to build up like a library with very different, diverse books they can have access to, different topics, different narratives, authors, with all kind of different backgrounds. Because that's something I enjoyed during my studies at the University of Leipzig. We had a lot of different debates, talk about different perspectives on those topics. We learned a lot about the importance of context in those debates. So how to be a critical reader, how to consider context, information, time period, social, racial issues that really play into those topics. So that's something that helped me a lot during high school as well as university.
Hello, is this on? Yeah, okay, thanks. My name's Laura Jeffries, and I teach at Florida State College at Jacksonville. And I have a sort of a few lead-ins here that are maybe a little longer than the question itself. But I wanted to sort of set up a look at the variety of students who are coming into college classrooms in the United States. Everyone on this panel has had access, no matter how you got to that access, to some really wonderful educational opportunities. And that includes information and facts. And, and that is so awesome to see. I teach at a college where that is not always the case. I have students coming to me from every kind of educational environment. And I want to connect some things I've heard on the panel so far this morning. The idea of facts, that we all have to share the same facts, and the idea that it's not the students claiming to be indoctrinated. I have some different experiences with my students, and I kind of want to know, and I'll work around to this in just one more second here, what you guys would want to do about that. So one thing that I was thinking about when we talked about facts, when you guys were talking about facts, is one of my favorite videos to watch is on YouTube. Everyone should watch it. The evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins is debating the creationist Wendy Wright. It's an old video. And she keeps talking about whether or not people believe in evolution. And Dawkins is losing patience, and he says, it's not whether you believe in it, it's whether you know about it. And that brings us to, I find that relevant again and again in my own passage through class after class, as on the teacher side of it. So, and so that's one part of my lead in, is this idea about people bringing different sets of facts. And I mean big facts. Facts on the largest scale. What is reality, right? Is the world 6,000 years old or a little older? And when people are bringing these, when a student comes into the classroom, so keep that in mind. And then I also want to talk about students that I have on a regular basis. I have students who do complain about the reading assignments, who do feel that they are being indoctrinated by being assigned an essay written by Alex Myers, a transgender activist and writer, And they say they've never heard of this before, and then I've exposed them to something and they can't read the essay. A George Orwell novel called Burmese Days, where the N-word is used and debated among the characters. And they can't read that. And a variety of things. So I do run into that. Some of it is they're being driven by their parents, but some of it is them. It is the student who doesn't want to do the reading. They want an alternate reading assignment, which I don't give. So then my question is, yeah, I don't. Of course not. And do I have time to come up with all of this and run a private tutorial with that student, even if I wanted to? Of course not. And some of the students that I'm talking about are coming from sort of maybe a very small private Christian school that has no academic standards and is not providing what would be a legitimate education. And so my question is, as students or as teaching assistants or as maybe future professors, what do you do? What do you want your professors to do? What do you think other students should do? When you do have a couple of students in a class who are bringing in a totally different set of facts, because you said we can't share, we have our own opinions, but we can't have our own facts. I can't just throw these kids out. I don't want to throw them out. They vote too, but I've got them for, 2 hours a week for 12 or 15 weeks.
Well, just quickly, can I ask you, when you have these students, do you push back?
I do, and I don't know how uncomfortable that makes my other students. Some of them, I can tell they like it. Some of the students leave the classroom because they feel that there's a mountain of difference between us and they don't know how to navigate. They might be afraid I'm going to persecute them. It doesn't go that well.
Well, I actually had this experience here at Flagler. Quickly, I'll just say, I think, I would just ask the student, what do you think education is? Just because you've never heard of this transgender author does not mean that that person does not exist. And reading their novel and exposing you to it, do they think that they're going to leave the classroom and somehow they think that now they need to transition? I mean, what is the fear there? We need to get serious. I mean, these are not real debates. It's ridiculous, and we're entertaining them as if they are. So I think that professors really need to get a grip and be like, what, push back. I mean, I had to press one of my professors here at Flagler. It was a foreign policy in Latin America, and there were 2 students in the class of probably 30 students total. Who constantly were just spewing out Tucker Carlson talking points. And one of them was, well, I know that drugs are the worst in New York and California and fentanyl deaths. And I quickly pulled out my laptop and looked it up. Those 2 states weren't even in the top 10. And I asked the professor after class, I said, why do you not correct these students? Because the professors are afraid. They're afraid of being penalized by the administration. They're afraid of, being canceled online. They're afraid of, Moms for Liberty showing up and, protesting them. So like I said earlier, these bills are vague and have many effects, and these are some of them in the underbelly. But students are going into classrooms and acting as if they already have all of the answers. And the professors are letting it happen because they don't want to argue with the student. But I'm sorry, this professor was hired for a reason. And don't get me wrong, there is a time and a place to push back on a professor. Believe me, I've done it. But over an assigned reading, I mean, Dr. Butler gave us many readings in a very short 6-week class that there was no way that I was ever going to be able to finish. Did I argue with him? No. It is what it is, So I think that professors need to coalesce with themselves and really try and figure out how they can stand up for themselves and not allow students to come in there. And just another fact, if you will, there are statistics out there that will show that when trust in media prior to Fox News being created by Roger Ailes was very, very high. And all media was basically sharing the same facts. It was basically just personalities that people wanted to tune into, Walter Cronkite, whomever. After that, trust in media started to evaporate. And Fox News was created for a very specific purpose by Roger Ailes, which was to push their own narrative. That is not news. And so when people start bringing in, and not to say there aren't real legitimate journalists at Fox News or in right-wing media, Tucker Carlson is not a journalist. And there were many students, even at Flagler, that argue with me that he is, just because he's on the news, that he's a journalist, and he is not. So again, I think because I was, a non-traditional college student and was already well-informed on many, political things that were happening, I pushed back a lot on students instead of the professors. But I think, it's a big problem that professors are going to have to step up and be like, I understand that you might be uncomfortable. You might not like transgender people. This book is not going to make you want to transition, I promise you. So.
And I would also say, going along with that kind of pushback idea, is kind of ask/challenge them to, number one, think about why they're even in your class. What are they trying to get out of education? Like, what is their purpose or reason for pursuing that higher education and what that means to them? But also kind of challenge them, because for me, and I will, specifically say for me as a Black woman, a Black queer woman, actually, I, from 2 years old, it feels like, have had to hear stories that are challenging, that make me uncomfortable. Black people hear about slavery from the moment we can even comprehend things. We learn about how our ancestors were enslaved, beaten, raped, abused, hung throughout a whole vast history of America. It's not just slavery, but when you go past slavery, then you hear about Jim Crow, and you hear about segregation and all these things. And yet we are expected to do our own work to educate ourselves about our history. And not only that, but then when we get into school, we are then expected to learn about somebody else's history that often contradicts what we know about ourselves. And yet that's what we are expected as students to do, to go out and get knowledge and history and facts about somebody completely different from us. And yet there is no, oh, but that makes me uncomfortable. Can I do something else? No, there is none of that. And it's been like this since the beginning of our education. So I challenge those students who say, oh, well, I'm uncomfortable. Well, think about all the other students, because it's not just Black people. It's a variety of marginalized groups and different identities, social identities, who have to do their own education while also being forced to be educated on other people. And we don't get to say, oh, well, we don't want to do that, even though sometimes I don't. And once again, I don't want to offend anybody, but sometimes I get sick of hearing about white people or men. I get tired of it. I'm sorry, but it is what it is. We have to, because if we don't know about the other people, well, then how are we supposed to know about ourselves? And if we don't know about the other people, then how are we supposed to move forward to go on, if say they want to be doctors, say they want to be lawyers, say they want to be an engineer, you can't continue on to do well and succeed on the outside looking in. I mean, on the inside, they might think they're that person, but you can't be successful truly without being able to step out of yourself and like not only accept and those assignments from teachers like you, but seek that yourself. I feel like then once you start from, well, why are you here? Why are you a student? Why are you learning? Whatever. And also, well, do you know that other people have to do this on a daily basis and they don't complain? Then we can tell them to, sit down and welcome the opportunity to learn more about themselves. I mean, who doesn't want to do that? I see it as a opportunity for improvement. So then that goes to, well, do they want to improve themselves? Do they want to improve their community, their cultures, what they find important is do they see that they can improve that? Because then they will be able to go out and accept your assignments and read your assignments and sit down and be quiet when they do so. That's my opinion on that.
And also, I just want to add quickly, if I may, if these students are objecting to these things, when they go out into the real world, are they just going to object to everything? If they're a law clerk and they're clerking for the Supreme Court or a district court and they have a case come in front of them and they have to write a summary judgment on it or whatever the case may be, and it happens to be a case involving a transgender person, are they not going to write it because now they're uncomfortable, or they don't want to read it because they're uncomfortable? I mean, it's not real. And like I said earlier, we're defending things that don't need to be defended. It's ridiculous.
I think we are out of time here. I want to please join me in thanking these extraordinary students and leaders and those of us who have been asking questions about where do we find hope. It's right here. So thank you.
I just want to say, this has been an extraordinary conference. We have had many, many incredible sessions. This is by far and away the most exciting, inspiring, informative. I just felt so moved as you were speaking, and the conference organizers, and I will stand up and try to figure out how to do this. We have got to get this session transcribed, and we have got to get this session in print. And I would be so great if we could find a place in Florida, a prominent venue to do it. I was thinking, and then we could take it national elsewhere. But this, you have to be heard by everyone who can and will read in the state, because what you have all shared is so profound, so deep, and so important. And you're all so eloquent. Thank you. I just want to, as one of the conference organizers, I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you.
And thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. There's no way to sum up this session or this conference, frankly. Thank you all. Hold on. I'm gonna, well, President Okkerer, you can sit down if you'd like. Okay. What I take from this, among other things, we didn't quite get to the issue you raised at the beginning, President Okkerer, about how the left is part of the problem too. About literature, about reading, about a lot of things, and about language policing, but we don't have to go there. But what I took from this is, you see, we have the word freedom up there. Freedom's the most overused word perhaps in American language. It can mean anything and everything to everybody. But what you all were, to me, we're really talking about is that reading is freedom. Reading is freedom in your own mind. And Douglas's narrative if you read nothing else on reading, read a section on what reading meant to a slave. It first made him feel like he was more imprisoned because he was learning about the world outside of his captivity. He said it threw him into the abyss with no ladder out. But then he flips the script. He says, oh, but it also became my way out. Reading is freedom itself. But as you were also saying, I think, is when you get up off your favorite reading chair, and we all kind of have one, you got to act. Whether you got 4 shelves or 10 shelves or 100 shelves of books, those books are freedom. I start every lecture class. You just tell them about the syllabus, and you got to read this, and you got to read that, and you got to write these 3 papers. But then I just embarrass myself. I take a book, usually Douglas's narrative, and I walk out among the students, and I start tapping it like a newborn. And I say, you know what? I ask them, I said, what is this? And they look like me like I'm stupid. Well, it's a book, idiot, of course. What is it really? What is it? You throw them on the floor, you throw them in your backpack. We all buy books. I trip over books in my apartment. But what is this thing? It's the most amazing creation of humans. A book. And I don't, in college, we don't stop and think about that. We just pile up our books and try to read part of them. But reading is freedom. They can't trap you if you can keep reading, as long as you get up off the chair to do something. Anyway, Michael, I think, is going to take us out. This amazing final session. I agree. And by the way, the live streaming of this can, as Daniel has already done, can all be parceled out. You can dial up a single session. You can dial up this session. We can send a session out to certain uses, your own uses, if you want. When you see yourself on a session, you have to, I know I'm always on all these things. I don't always want to send it out after I see what I said, but no, you will. This is a perfect way to end. I kept telling everybody the best sessions were with the teachers. Now, the best session I think may have been with the students. But Michael, you want to say a word about where we go here? Other than leaving, but and I again want to thank Daisha for running around with a mic. Thank you, Daisha. And you didn't make it easy by sitting up in the cheap seats, and Daniel and Peter for running all the media for us. And
Sure, Peter as well.
Yeah. And our tremendous hosts here at Flagler. Thank you. One of the most moving and interesting conferences I've been part of a lot of conferences. So Michael.
What we're doing next is the question that I've been answering for the past day and a half, in all honesty. I think that what we're going to do next, practically speaking, is enjoying St. Augustine. It's been exhausting. It has been encouraging. It's been infuriating. It's been everything. So I know we're all mentally drained. However, I do want Deja to talk a little about what the next steps are, because one of the things that all of the organizers and all of the participants have said to me, and it's been incredibly encouraging, is we've got to keep going. What is next? What can we do now? There is a conference, the National, the Network for Public Education, and there will be flyers out about that next conference, but Deja and the Gilder Lehrman Center also have ideas about webinar, workshops, topics, ideas. It's time to talk back to us. What worked? What do you want to see more of? What do you need for your classroom? So Deja.
So, hi everyone. I don't think I've ever formally introduced myself. My name is Deja Bravo. I'm the Education and Public Outreach Director with the Gilder Lehrman Center. And similar to what he said, I think the best part about education, the best part about these conferences is that hopefully you're able to learn to then do, right? To put those thoughts into action, put them into practice in your own areas. We have a variety of different beautiful people here, but we also have a lot of people who are online, who have been online throughout the entire conference, coming from different areas. And I just wanted to follow up on something that Dr. Okker said, is that reading is under attack. It's not just in the form of banned books. You know, I'm just saying from my area in Connecticut, we don't necessarily have banned books, but if 50% of your schools don't have librarians, right? If you don't have funding for your public libraries, that is a banning of books in a different form. And so you want to think about that, especially in how are we going to be a part of the resistance in our own areas. We kind of got this yesterday from one of the teachers, exploding kind of like the room that you have. And so we're hopefully thinking about a series of workshops where we can have people come back and really get energized and get the training that they need to start fighting back in their own areas. So we're really excited to look back on that. I encourage you to sign up for different newsletters. Just a quick plug, the Gilder Lehrman Center has a newsletter that I happen to edit. So please sign up for it. If you want any more information, we have it out there. Follow along with all the different organizations that are going to continue to be putting out work for us to do. But I really enjoyed this conference weekend, and I hope that you all did as well. And let's go enjoy St. Augustine.
Yeah, once again, thanks to all of our partners. We've said this a million times, but it's true. It's not goodbye. It's see you later.